In this lesson for task 3C, we're going to look at developing our rhythm sections. Now you can see here that I've already started inputting some of my rhythm sections. Now because I've gone down this route of soundscape stroke modern composition rather than just a generic song, I've kind of gone away from just using a drum kit. Okay, so I'm building up my layers using percussive sounds. Okay, so this is going to give me some really nice textures to kind of deal with. Now as you can see, I'm using triangles, some claves, some bongos, a vinyl scratch, which I'll talk about in a second. I'm also using this one here, which is a shaker, and a tambourine. Okay, so now these have all been developed using loops. In this particular task, because we're composing for technology or with technology, it's completely acceptable to use loops and samples. However, there are two things that you need to keep in mind. Okay, the first is, if you're going to use someone else's sample or loop, you have to accredit it in your logbook. You cannot pass it off as your own. And secondly, if you do use someone else's loop or sample, you do need to manipulate it in some other way to get accreditation for it. Okay, you will not get marks for it if you don't do that. Now a lot of my students in the past have dumped a bunch of Apple loops into their composition and gone, yeah, look what I've done, this is brilliant. And it's like, I'm sorry, that's not cutting it for me. I and most of the other examiners can spot an Apple loop a million miles away. Okay, and they will knock you down for it. If you do not accredit that and tell them how you've changed it, they will knock you down for it. And you may think you're being really clever and smart by using these things, and you are, but if you don't accredit someone else for their work, you will lose those marks. Okay, so it's not cheating to use someone else's loop or sample, but you do need to accredit it and you do need to adapt it. Now in Logic and in Cubase, you have these media areas, or these loop panels. It can be found here in Logic using this button. Now you'll see that there's hundreds and thousands of these samples. If I was going down the drum route, I'd click on this one and I'd come in here and I would grab a drum beat. Now if you click on it, let me just go to the top somewhere and see if I can find some decent ones. Here we go. So if you click on a blue one, this is an audio loop. Now I would say to my students, use the green ones, because the green ones have a lot more flexibility to be edited with. Okay, so let me play a couple. So here's a blue one. This is an audio one. Okay, and it's nice. Oops, sorry. Now if I drag that in and drop it here somewhere, let me just take this off of that tool. Now if I drop it here, you can see my editing capabilities, apart from adding effects to it, are pretty limited because it is just an audio track. It may sound okay, it may sound completely rubbish, it may not even be in time, so let me make sure I get the timing right. So, there we go. Oh, I think I knocked it again, never mind. There we go, that's better. The good thing about samples that are done this way also, when you drag them to your file, they will be in time with your piece. So that's another benefit. Now, have a listen to these green ones, and for most of you, you've probably already seen this and you're probably completely au fait with it, but for those that haven't seen it, I'm going to show you. Now this is the green one, so these are the MIDI files, okay, MIDI loops, of which there are loads and loads again. So now this time drag it in, okay, and you'll notice you have a MIDI file. If you double click on this time, all of these notes can be edited, which is absolutely brilliant. Now in order to get accreditation, you do need to edit it. So think about a few ways of editing this particular track. The first way, come to your pointer and maybe delete some things from it so that it builds up slower, so you've not got the same patterns. Second way, why not try moving the groove around a little bit, and for that I need to zoom in a bit more. So rather than having it like this, maybe move it to this one here. Let's turn mine to division so it goes into the right place, so you can move it around and do that. Another way is you can use velocity, so you can actually change the notes loudness, or you can select loads of notes and change the notes loudness, and that will give you something else. Another thing you can do is come over with this track selected, come over to where it says quantize, and you can use one of these groove quantizers. Now let me just select a bunch of notes. Okay, and we'll come over to quantize, and we'll come down. Now the swing patterns are really nice for kind of getting those natural grooves, and this will just edit it a little bit further. So let's go to 1/16 swing in F, and you'll notice the notes will just ever so slightly move, or quite a bit in that case actually. But now you've got a completely different pattern. If you don't like that, Control Z, or Command Z, sorry, will move them back, and you can try a different one. So let's keep with the swings actually. Swings probably work slightly better, but probably in 8s this time. Still massive changes, never mind. Once again, you might have to play with it. I'm not used to it doing such big ones. Maybe it's because I've got the quantized values different. Let me try it one more time before I give up on this. No, it's this particular pattern is just kind of thrown all over. It doesn't matter. Anyway, those are the ways in which you can manipulate these tracks. So you should definitely be thinking about doing that. You should definitely be making them different from the actual original, writing about that. Okay, let's get rid of these tracks. Let's zoom in. So that's Apple Loops. So that's one way in which you've used technology in your piece. Now the other way is using the samples, so loops and samples. Here is a sample that I'm using for the scratch. Now this is quite interesting. I love doing this. I use samples to like reverse symbols and things like that to transition from one section to another section. Now in Logic, and it's slightly different in Cubase, I can't really remember how to do it in Cubase, but in Logic you have this fade tool. Now if you come down to fade, and if you drew a normal fade, it would just reduce the volume on the end or the beginning, okay? But if you right click on it, control click, you have this option here. You can change it from fade or to slow down. So if you are handling with the right side of the container, that's a slow down. If you're handling from the left side of the container, that's a speed up. Okay, so with that selected, you can actually make it speed up or slow down. Now, let me show you this sample and how it sounds. It might take me a couple of seconds just to scroll down and find it. Here we go. So it's number 24. So here it is. Okay, so that's the sample. Now I've put this all the way across it, so it's slowing down. Sorry, it's slowing down. So this is what it sounds like in my track. Okay, so there is two ways in which I've used somebody else's loops and somebody else's samples to create a bit of interest in my own. So I'm using technology. Now, as said previously, I've got this track here. It's going really well and it's starting to build up really nicely and I'm happy. But you'll notice that at the moment I'm only using percussive sounds in this second section. I may build that up even further. I haven't really decided yet, but I'm just layering it to see what's possible, okay? And because of the style that I'm going for, I've kind of done this layering effect. So if you look at my triangle, it comes in first during the break, all on its own. So if I click here, okay, a nice pattern, and I haven't edited these yet, but I do need to in order to gain accreditation for them. And then once we get here, I'm bringing in these claves. So then it's building up a little bit further. And when I put the melody in, it's going to be so interesting. So here we go, have a listen to this. It's still quite gentle, but it's getting there, and I've got a lot more momentum going now. And over here, I'm going to go kind of Ladysmith Black Mambazo on this one, where I kind of layer some chanting vocals. So I've added this bongo, and it's sounding really cool. I like this. I've got some really good ideas for these chanting bits here, so I'm going to deal with them in a couple of lessons time. And then at the end, the biggest one here, so where everything's kind of in, is here. So we've got all the tambourines, the shakers, the bongos, and this triangle. So let's have a listen to this. Okay, so you can hear that and it's going really well and I'm starting to build up momentum. Now, for you guys, you may be thinking, and I was thinking this earlier, that my song is starting to sound a little dirgy and that basically means slow and kind of, it drags a little bit. And it will get more interesting, I promise you that. But that A lot of the reason for that is because I'm doing my project at 100 BPMs. So if you're not really happy with it kind of going in that direction, do make sure that you speed that tempo up. And if you want something that's a bit more upbeat, especially if you're going for the pop route, you're going to be needing to look at 110, 120, 130, okay? And that will give you a lot more momentum from an earlier stage. I will get there with my momentum, but it is going to take me a little bit longer. The other thing I've done to these tracks is started editing. So I'm starting mixing as I go along. So I've added reverb to all of them, and it's quite a heavy reverb because I'm going for that soundscapey kind of texture and style. I've also put some panning on the instruments already, so I've got some happening in the left speaker, some happening in the right, and there's a little bit of bounce as well. And I'm also finding their position in the mix as well, so each track has a different position in the mix, a different place in the stereo field, and they all have this lovely reverb to kind of make them sound as one. Now I think that's pretty much all I have to say about using Apple loops and samples and building up rhythms. You will need to spend a bit of time building these things up, and it is really useful, especially if you're not a drummer or a percussionist, to kind of have access to these loops. But please don't palm them off as your own. Make sure you write about them. It is acceptable as long as you write about them and edit them, okay? Now that's all I have to say about that. In the next lesson, we're going to start looking at the vocal and start building up our melody. So that's going to be an interesting one. And we'll try and use technology to do that, and we'll look at some techniques for that. So get your rhythms in. Make sure your piece is taking shape and you've got all the foundations done. And I'll see you in the next lesson.